Okay, so picture this. Somewhere in Toledo right now, there's a family, a household, that just put like $87 of gasoline on a credit card. And that card, it's carrying a 21.52% interest rate. They didn't do it because they wanted to finance gasoline, right? They did it because if they didn't, they just wouldn't get to work. That household, they're in the lowest income bracket, and gas now eats up over 7% of their total income. And get this, serious credit card delinquencies for people like them have just shot up 63% over the last 3 years.
And the craziest part is, Marilyn, that's happening the exact same week that America's biggest tech companies, borrowing at these corporate rates that are just objectively totally lower than what that household's paying for groceries, for goodness sake, are committing roughly $660 to $700 billion in 2026 alone just to AI infrastructure. It's wild.
Right? So 2 debt-financed bets on like the exact same rate path. Different income tiers, totally different APRs, but the mechanism is, well, it's the same, isn't it?
Yeah. And in about 28 hours from right now, from us recording this, the Federal Reserve is going to drop a statement. And it will almost certainly not reference either of those things in connection with the other. By the time we finish this conversation, though, you should be able to read Thursday morning's GDP print, not as like a measurement of economic strength, but as a measurement of how much new credit was extended just to keep the aggregate line moving. That's the one thing I want you to leave with, really.
And I want you to leave with a sharper question than the one you came in with about whether the institutions handling this still, are what they say they are.
Let's just start with what's actually on the table, Wednesday, 10 a.m. Eastern, the Senate Banking Committee votes on Kevin Warsh as the next Fed chair. 2 p.m., FOMC rate decision, third consecutive hold, projected at 100% by CME FedWatch. 2:30, Powell's likely final press conference. Then Thursday, 8:30, Q1 GDP advance estimate and weekly jobless claims. That is the gauntlet, really.
And here is the gap that gauntlet is exposing. The Federal Reserve's stated path is all about patience, right? They're going to wait until the Iran conflict clarifies. They're holding rates at 3.50 to 3.75, just deferring the cut question. But capital markets have already done a totally different thing. They have priced out all 2026 rate cuts. 6 months ago, money markets had 58 basis points of easing priced in for this year. That has been fully retraced. Gold just dropped 2.5% to $4,702, breaking a 4-week rally. And WTI crude spiked over 5% intraday to 101.81 yesterday after Trump canceled the Pakistan envoy. It's a lot.
So the directional summary here is that capital has moved roughly 2/4 of repricing into a 6-week window, and the institution is just, 2/4 behind it. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And I really want to push on the framing that's being used to describe that gap. Because the standard reading, is that markets have moved toward where the Fed will eventually arrive. That framing is, it's just super generous to the institution, isn't it? It assumes the Fed is processing the same information, just slower. But the available evidence, it actually supports a different read. The Fed is processing the same information, and it's just choosing not to act on it. There's a big difference between deliberation and, a stall.
Give me, the analogy, the mental picture.
Okay, so imagine a fishing trawler whose instruments show calm water, right? While every other vessel within 100 miles has already rigged for storm. The captain isn't reading different weather. The captain is reading the same weather and has decided that to rig for storm now would be to admit something about the previous decision not to rig for storm. So the trawler just holds its line,
Oh, so that's a credibility cost calculation then, not a forecasting failure.
Right, exactly. And it shows up in the gold print. Gold falling in this environment is not like a vote against inflation. It is a vote against the inflation hedge thesis. Capital is rotating out of the traditional hedge because capital is not betting on runaway inflation. It's betting on something that breaks the system's liquidity before inflation runs. The Kalshi gold contract for end of 2026 above $2,800 sits at 0.62. The order book is materially less convinced of the inflation story than the wire service narrative implies.
And if you take that read seriously, the Fed's wait actual inflation clarifies framing is, well, it's targeting the wrong variable. The variable that needs to clarify is the energy supply regime, not the price level. WTI at $101 isn't telling you about excess demand. It's telling you that 25% of seaborne oil normally moves through a strait that is currently running at 5% of pre-conflict traffic, isn't it?
Which means the Fed isn't waiting for an inflation print. The Fed is waiting for a war to end. Those are, they're not the same thing. And the institution just doesn't have a tool to convert one into the other, you know?
Okay, that's the baseline then. Now, what's the second order effect from all this? The AI CapEx bet, projected at $660 to $700 billion in 2026, nearly double 2025. It's shifted its financing structure, hasn't it? The Magnificent Seven's free cash flow has actually gone slightly negative across the last several quarters. Amazon's 2026 consensus moved from an expected $76 to $105 billion in positive free cash flow, which was the projection 2 years ago, to an expected $11 billion in cash burn.
I really want to name what that shift actually is, because I think the prevailing read just totally undersells it. 2 years ago, the AI infrastructure build-out was, well, it was a cash deployment story. The companies with the most cash were committing the most capital. That is a bet on internal productivity. The shift to debt financing now, it just makes it a different bet. It is now a bet that the future productivity of borrowed capital will exceed the carrying cost of the debt at current rates. Do you know what I mean?
Which is, it's the exact same bet the household at 21.52% APR is making, right?
Yes, absolutely. And nobody talks about it that way because the rates are different by an order of magnitude, and because the assets being acquired are different. But the underlying structure, it's identical. Both are debt-financed bets that the future productivity of capital exceeds the cost of carry. The household is buying groceries on credit because the wage path implies the wage will eventually catch up. The hyperscaler is buying H100s on debt because the AI revenue path implies the productivity will eventually arrive. Both are extending duration on a productivity assumption, you know?
Project that forward, like 5 to 10 years.
Okay, so if AI productivity arrives on schedule, the corporate bet pays off and the household bet does not. Productivity gains, they just accrue to capital. Wage suppression continues because automation reduces labor demand. The bifurcation just accelerates, really. That is the optimistic scenario for the corporate side, and it is a structural deterioration for the household side, you know?
And if AI productivity does not arrive on schedule, then what?
Then you get a coordinated default surface. Corporate debt and household debt deteriorating in the same window because both are sensitive to the same rate path. That is the scenario in which the Fed cannot use the rate lever in either direction without just breaking something. Cut to relieve households, you subsidize the corporate bet, whose viability is the load-bearing assumption of the equity market, and you confirm that policy bends to AI CapEx commitments. Hold or hike to discipline the corporate bet, and you accelerate the household default curve.
This is the part the inflation targeting framework, well, it just wasn't built to handle, was it? The framework treats the rate as a single lever governing aggregate demand. It is now a single lever governing two debt-financed bets that share a productivity assumption, but cannot be released from that assumption simultaneously without, breaking one of them.
The lateral connection holds because the mechanism is the rate, Marcus. Not theme, not metaphor. The same federal funds rate is the carrying cost on both sides of the trade.
And the Fed knows this.
The Fed knows this, which is the bridge to where this gets harder. Because if the institution knows it is operating a single instrument across two trades that can no longer be released simultaneously, the question becomes how the institution makes that choice. And the answer to that question is the part of this story that is no longer entirely about monetary policy.
Walk me through it.
Okay, so the source brief, it uses a phrase I really want to push on. It calls what is happening to the legal architecture around the Fed leadership transition law as variable rather than law as boundary. A boundary is a hard limit, right? A variable is something inside an optimization function, a cost to be traded against a benefit. The brief argues that the DOJ investigation into Powell, suspended at the moment its suspension affected the Warsh confirmation vote, with the suspending authority reserving the right to resume, is observable as a variable. I think that framing is correct as far as it goes, but I think it just doesn't go far enough, you know?
So what's the sharper claim here then?
Law as variable treats the legal system as a single dial that can be, turned up or down. The actual mechanism is law as portfolio, separate dials for separate actors, each tuned to the political price of moving them. As of this morning, the Powell dial wasn't turned off. It was transferred. U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro handed the investigation to the Federal Reserve Inspector General's office. Tillis received specific assurances that resumption now requires a criminal referral from the IG, a different procedural threshold under a different authority. The same week, the DOJ is continuing its probe against Governor Lisa Cook. And per Senator Warren's statement, the FBI conducted zero investigation of Kevin Warsh's financial holdings or his appearance in the publicly available Epstein files.
So, same Federal Reserve Board, 3 governors, 3 enforcement settings then.
Concurrently, that is not a single dial. That is a portfolio.
Let me hold the strongest version of the counter-argument here, because I think you totally have to. The steel man runs like this. No governor's vote has been changed. No specific FOMC decision has been demonstrably altered by an enforcement action. No vote has been bought or sold. Until that happens, what we're describing is just, well, institutional stress under unusual political pressure. Stress is not capture. The formal independence of the Fed is intact. Powell will vote his policy view Wednesday. Cook will vote hers. Warsh, if confirmed, will inherit the same constraints any chair inherits.
That is the strongest version. I want to test it directly. The question I'd put to it is this. When Powell announces he is considering staying on as a governor past May 15th, specifically to ensure the investigation is, quote, truly over, that sentence is in the public record. Is constraint keeping a structural property of the institution? Or is it a personal cost borne by an individual governor at his own discretion?
Those are not the same regime.
They are not. Independence as a structural property means the threat surface across governors is uniform and the cost of constraint keeping is bounded. Independence as a personal cost means the institution still produces independent decisions, but only when the individuals occupying it choose to absorb the cost personally. That works as long as the individuals occupying it are willing to absorb the cost personally. It is not a property of the institution. It is a property of the people inside it at a particular moment, you know?
The steel man cracks there, not because a vote has been bought, because the cost structure of constraint keeping has changed in a way the steel man just cannot see.
And what survives the test is a refined claim. The Federal Reserve has not failed. It has shifted from a regime where independence was guaranteed structurally into a regime where independence requires individual sacrifice. Those are different regimes. The first one produces independent decisions automatically. The second one produces them as long as the inhabitants are willing to bear the personal cost. Neither is inherently broken. They are just, not the same thing.
And the next chair, whoever it is, inherits the second regime, not the first, right?
Whether or not the dial is ever exercised against him, absolutely.
Okay, let me bring this back to where I told the listener we'd land. Wednesday, 2 p.m. Eastern, the FOMC statement drops. The diagnostic question is not whether they cut. They are not cutting. The diagnostic question is whether the language acknowledges that the rate they are holding is being passed through to households at 21.52% APR who just, cannot absorb it. If the statement treats household credit as endogenous noise rather than as the live transmission channel for energy inflation that it functionally is, if the lowest decile 63% relative growth in delinquencies registers as a distributional footnote rather than a monetary signal, the institution is still operating on a framework in which the people most exposed to its decisions are not visible inside the model the decisions are being made on. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally do. And Thursday morning when GDP prints, that print is a measurement. The aggregate figure tells you nominal consumer spending held up, but the relevant ratio is what fraction of that spending was funded by net new credit card extension. Aggregate limits rose $95 billion in Q4 2025 alone. If the Q1 print holds up while delinquencies climb and limits expand, that is not strength. That is the system using household balance sheets as a shock absorber, and reporting the shock absorption as growth,
That is the read I want you to take into Thursday. Not stronger or weaker than expected, but funded how?
And one last thing for the listener to carry, really. Brent crude closed Monday at $108.92. The Strait of Hormuz has been running at roughly 5% of its pre-conflict shipping volume since late February. Trump canceled the envoy to Pakistan because the Iranian offer, in his words, should have been better. Iran's standing offer is to reopen Hormuz if the U.S. ends the port blockade. The Fed's stated posture is to wait until the conflict clarifies before adjusting policy. But the conflict is not waiting. It is the fixed condition. The institution is the variable, and it is waiting for clarity from a negotiation in which it has no seat, no leverage, and no instrument to produce the resolution it requires. It's pretty stark.
Watch the data this week.
Watch what the data is funded by.
Before we wrap this up, a huge thank you to all our viewers and listeners. If you found this discussion valuable, please hit like, leave a comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this episode to help broaden our network. Your support truly matters.
Exactly, Marcus. What we've laid out isn't abstract. It's about a system with a critical blind spot. The Fed's deferral, waiting on geopolitical clarity, means capital markets have moved on, and households are bearing the immediate cost.
So the takeaway isn't merely tracking rates, but understanding the strained mechanisms, the two debt-financed bets, their diverging outcomes, and the shift in the Fed's operational independence.
Precisely. The aggregate stability masks a profound bifurcation and an institutional struggle. The system isn't failing dramatically, it's revealing its fault lines through subtle, critical misalignments.
A stark picture, Marilyn. Thank you for your expert insights.